As we sit here in the middle of May, with you and your staff having been in Manhattan for roughly 4 or 5 months, are you pleased with the current state of this first recruiting class and right about where you hoped it would be, or slightly off the pace one way or another?
Well, when you say the
Upcoming,
because really in 2019 we were scrambling in behind the eight ball a little bit, and obviously we're trying to get ahead in the 2020. We're still probably a little bit behind, in all honesty, in just how the process goes, because we've been visiting or in communication with a lot of these 2020 kids, whether it's been since January or since last week, where some people probably have been talking to these kids for a year or two, because there's people in the 2021 and 2022 class are even starting to get mentioned and stuff now. So I feel good in the fact that we've got 10 guys out on the road, busting their tail, evaluating guys, and we're coming up with a really good plan as far as by position, what we're looking for, how many we have to get at each position. And so, we'll all reconvene here at the end of May and look at our boards and see where we're at. But, obviously you always wish you're further along. That's just the nature of recruiting. And we could be talking in November or early December, and I'd be saying the same thing. It's just, it's so fluid. Recruiting is so fluid, and it changes on a daily basis. But I know this. We have a staff out there that's really doing a great job of evaluating guys and building our boards.
You mentioned the 10 guys out recruiting, and naturally that's the limit you can have out recruiting. But one of the things that probably needed some change when you came in was beefing up that recruiting staff, the support staff. How have you moved on that so far?
Well, for starters, just getting 10 guys out is I think, something a little bit new here.
Yep.
Getting everybody out, and we're still a work in progress as far as beefing up that recruiting staff. We've got some GAs doing some multitasking right now, and some quality control guys doing multitasking. And I think we're going to learn. And I know it's going to be one full year of a cycle for us to learn where else we need some more help at. Obviously, we need to get some more help for Taylor Bratt, and I think that's coming down in the near future here. But our coaches have to do a great job of building these great relationships with these student athletes, and then staying on top of them, as well as myself and everybody else that's involved.
At this point, you and your staff have been in touch with a large number of prospects and their parents and their coaches. What have you found to be the universal strong suit of pitching K-State and K-State football?
Discipline, toughness, character, integrity. I mean, those are the things that are non-negotiable. Those are the things that I think have built Kansas State in Bill's time here for sure, and have also where I've had really good success at North Dakota State is, you can win with kids that have great character and great integrity, that are really good football players, sometimes better than you can a five-star that maybe is more about himself. And,
right.
and the fact that for us to identify those guys is probably the most important part. And then, as well as, our ability to make sure that we have the chance to get kids that really want to be at Kansas State. And that's something that's really important to me, is finding those guys that you don't have to beg to come here, that want to come here and want to be a part of something special.
Is there a recruitment in particular that you're kind of proud of? I mean, where you and your staff did a good job, maybe from the 2019 class that you came in and got it done.
Yeah. I don't want to just mention one. I think there's a bunch of them. The one thing I'm a big believer in is not this guy signs 4, this guy signs 3, this guy signs 3. Once they come on campus, we're all involved. And I think that's really important, that a running back gets around Van Malone as the defensive back coach. An offensive lineman gets around Tui and Buddy as a defensive lineman, as defensive line coach, just because I don't want them to just have one relationship with somebody. That sometimes gets you hurt a little bit too when somebody leaves. I want guys to have great relationships with all of our coaches here. And so that's the thing I probably am most pleased with of the 19 classes. The amount of guys we brought in just those last 2 weekends, how many great relationships were built, and you weren't even talking about the same position or the same area of recruiting.
It's probably unreasonable to even talk about the kind of success you had at North Dakota State translating to Kansas State, but to get closer to that, kind of get back into the national title picture, which Kansas State's been in the past. What positions do you see the most need for immediate recruiting help?
Well, I don't know if you'd say position as much as we would say long athletic bodies that can run. And, whether it's a 6'4", 225-pound body that might be 285 in 2 years, or a 6'6", 210-pound body that might be 255 in the next couple of years, of just some longer athletic bodies that you don't know. They might be a defensive end, they might be a defensive tackle, they may be a tight end, which will be a big focal point of our offense, or it could be an offensive lineman at that, of just finding those longer, big bodies that have great potential to grow.
That's interesting you bring that up, because it's probably a real similarity with what Bill Snyder attempted to do at Kansas State. And that was, at North Dakota State, you probably had to evaluate not for what they are necessarily, but for what they will be. You're not going to go get the 6'4", 285-pound defensive tackle that can run a 4.5. Alabama gets those guys.
Yep.
So is projecting, seeing a kid for what they can be, the most important thing?
You bet. Development. It's seeing that young man and saying, okay, what will he be in 2 years? That's why it's so hard to evaluate a class in that first year, because although a lot of younger players are playing more and more, the bodies that we're talking about usually does take a year or two. If you get a defensive back, a wide receiver that, is 6 foot, 190-pound kid that, okay, you don't need to be 210 to play that position. But when you're a long, lean athlete, you need to put on some weight. And so developmental guys are really important. I think they're the lifeblood of a lot of programs across the landscape, is because a lot of those kids aren't the 5-star guys. They're the walk-on kids or the 3-star guys. And we're going to recruit an awful lot of those type of guys that we believe would fit a culture and fit our system. And that's something we're excited about doing.
5-star kids, I mean, obviously they're real gifted. There's a reason why they're 5 stars. Is that something where you kind of pick your battles? You just don't jump into every battle?
Yeah, and I don't get caught up into a lot of rankings, probably like I should, because you're just so narrow-minded of just, I'm looking at these guys, and do they fit what we're looking for at this position? Do they fit what we're looking for at this position? And you guys know it. You've probably missed on some guys that you would have said, boy, this guy's a 5-star guy and he never plays. Well, that number 11 that's up there on that wall wasn't any kind of a star in Carson Wentz, but he had competitive fire unlike anybody I've ever seen that would blow a 5-star away from that respect. Now, he was a 6'6", 190-pound skinny kid that had a rocket for an arm, but nobody knew much about him. But when you watch that young man compete, you're like, this kid's the best player in college football, and I thought he was that year. And I can pick second in the draft. He's pretty close to being the best player in college football. You're just looking for those guys that can develop, and you're always looking for those guys that love to compete.
How's recruiting changed for you now that you're at Kansas State instead of North Dakota State, where you're the big dogs in that environment, and going out and selling the PowerCat?
Yeah. It has not changed as far as the volume of guys. It really hasn't. It hasn't. People thought, boy, it's going to be a way different way of recruiting. People are wrong if they think that the schools in FCS don't recruit year-round, or that they just wait for everybody else to get taken up and then they end up taking a guy. That's furthest thing from the truth. You start recruiting year-round just like they do at the Power 5, just like they do Group of 5 or anything. You're just probably dealing with just more athletes in a wider base. We're throwing a net out. Obviously, Kansas and Missouri are really important to us. We're throwing a net out in Texas. We're throwing a net out now on the West Coast with Tui's ties in Arizona and California, and we're throwing a net out in Florida, where we've had some really good success. Whereas at North Dakota State, we were just probably really more regional. And then we would look at the state of Florida. So the volume of guys probably very similar. It's just, and I think I've noticed this over the last 5 years. I don't care where you're at. We've evaluated guys 3 years ago at North Dakota State saying, boy, we have a chance at him. I can't believe he has those offers. And we have a chance at this. I can't believe that kid doesn't have any offers.
Right.
So I don't think there's an exact science to it at all.
Now, you mentioned some of those new areas you've gone into: Los Angeles, Chicago, a little bit St. Louis, Utah, Arizona. those aren't places K-State has spent a lot of time in. How has the message of Kansas State football been received in those areas?
Really well. And you guys know this better than I do. But the West Coast at one time was pretty doggone good to Kansas State. Florida's probably pretty new to Kansas State, but I still think they're looking and listening for the brand of football. And if it's a tight end, you can sell that to anybody across the land when you just flip a film on and say, okay, we're going to utilize tight ends and stuff. And then defensively, I really like the things that Coach Hayes is doing, and Coach Hazelton and I were with each other at North Dakota State. That's just kind of a different type of athlete we're looking for at certain spots. It's been great to be able to just get out there and kind of show our brand and show what we're trying to do, both sides of the ball, to see if we can get guys to come visit here. That's the one thing that I would say Manhattan is pretty similar to Fargo, is if you get them here, you have an opportunity. It's still that challenge of come on over to check us out here in Manhattan. We have the same issues in Fargo. Minneapolis was the closest area. Kansas City is the closest area, too, as far as flying into something that you would say be a metropolitan area and then driving over. And we're going to continue to pound that pavement and just keep trying to sell our brand so we can get more kids to visit.
Thanks, Coach. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.